show me how, but I will not carry a gun.
All right, Captain.
They smiled at each other on camera, delivered their lines, and made millions of people believe they were watching something real. But behind some of the most beloved partnerships in television history, there was a different story playing out entirely, one involving slammed dressing room doors, lawyers on speed dial, and on-set atmospheres so poisonous that writers, producers, and eventually entire networks decided it was easier to just pull the plug than spend one more day in the middle of it. Today we are counting down 11 TV co-stars whose off-screen hatred became so spectacular, so all-consuming, and so completely unmanageable that it took the whole show down with it. Number 11. McLean Stevenson and Alan Alda, MASH. There is a version of this story where McLean Stevenson makes a completely reasonable decision. MASH premiered in 1972 as one of the most critically acclaimed shows on television, a dark, funny, and sometimes devastating look at the Korean War that used its premise as a vehicle to say things about Vietnam that network television was otherwise too nervous to say out loud. The ensemble was remarkable, but by 1974, something had become undeniable. Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce was not just the lead of the show. He was becoming the gravity around which everything else orbited. And McLean Stevenson, who played Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake with enormous warmth and genuine comedic skill, could feel it. He wanted more prominent storylines. He wanted the spotlight to move. He reportedly grew increasingly frustrated with the sense that no matter what he did, Alda's Hawkeye was the show and everyone else was set decoration. So, Stevenson did what seemed like a power move. He walked. He left one of the hottest shows on television at the peak of its popularity, betting that audiences would follow him to whatever came next. What came next was a string of failed solo projects and television movies that never came close to capturing what he had walked away from. And what happened to MASH? They killed Henry Blake off-screen in a plane crash over the Sea of Japan in one of the most devastating episode endings in television history. The show then ran for 8 more seasons without him, won virtually every award available, and its series finale in 1983 drew over 100 million viewers, a record that still stands. McLean Stevenson was a genuinely talented man who made a genuinely catastrophic miscalculation. He mistook his role in the ensemble for the whole show, and the whole show turned out to be just fine without him. The lesson here is painful and permanent. Sometimes the thing you are trying to escape from is the best thing that will ever happen to you. Stevenson passed away in 1996. His Henry Blake remains one of MASH's most beloved characters, which is either comforting or devastating, depending on your perspective. Number 10. Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas, Miami Vice. If you were alive in 1984, you remember what it felt like when Miami Vice arrived on NBC. The pastel suits, the stubble, the Ferrari, the soundtrack. Michael Mann had essentially invented a new visual language for primetime television and planted 2 of the coolest characters ever committed to a screen at the center of it. Sonny Crockett and Ricardo Tubbs. Don Johnson and Philip Michael Thomas. A partnership that crackled with genuine chemistry and made Miami look like the most dangerous and glamorous city in the world simultaneously. For the first 2 seasons, it worked. The show was a phenomenon. Johnson and Thomas were on the cover of every magazine. They recorded a duet together. They were, by every public measure, a team. But behind the scenes, the balance was shifting in ways that the cameras could not hide forever. Johnson's star was rising faster than the working relationship could handle. His escalating demands for creative control, script approval, and the narrative center of every major arc began to quietly erode the partnership that had made the show what it was. Thomas found himself increasingly sidelined. Tubbs, who had been an equal co-lead in the early seasons, began drifting toward the periphery of storylines that were more and more explicitly about Crockett. The chemistry that had made them iconic does not disappear overnight. It evaporates gradually, and if you watch seasons 4 and 5 back-to-back with the first 2, you can feel the difference. Something is missing that no amount of production value can replace. NBC canceled Miami Vice in 1989 after 5 seasons. It had gone from a cultural revolution to a show that felt like it was running out the clock. Johnson went on to Nash Bridges and a successful film career. Tom has pursued music and other projects. They have given carefully diplomatic interviews about each other over the years, the kind where every word is technically complimentary and somehow says everything anyway. Number 9. Kirk Cameron and the Growing Pains by Dolly cast. Now, if you watched our Cousin Oliver Syndrome video, you already know the broad strokes of Growing Pains' final season, including a young Leonardo DiCaprio showing up as a homeless teenager while the show quietly fell apart around him. But today we are talking about what was happening behind the camera, which is a considerably more uncomfortable story. Growing Pains premiered in 1985 as a breezy, warm family sitcom about a psychiatrist dad, a journalist mom, and 3 kids navigating suburban life in Long Island. It worked. Alan Thicke and Joanna Kearns had genuine parental chemistry. The kids were likable, and Kirk Cameron, playing teenager Mike Seaver, became one of the biggest teen idols of the entire decade. His face was on every locker in America. Then, around 1987 and 1988, Cameron underwent a significant religious conversion that began to reshape not just his personal life, but his professional one. He developed increasingly firm objections to storylines he felt conflicted with his new values. He pushed to have scripts rewritten, and in the most explosive single incident from the entire run of the show, he successfully lobbied to have guest actress Julie McCullough fired after discovering she had previously posed for Playboy. McCullough had been brought in as Mike's love interest with plans to make her a recurring character. Cameron's intervention ended that before it began. The effect on the set was, by multiple accounts, significant. Alan Thicke gave interviews over the years that were measured and professional and communicated a very clear undercurrent of frustration. Kearns has been similarly diplomatic. The tone of the show shifted from irreverent and fun to something that felt constrained, like a show that had been asked to wear a tie to a pool party. Growing Pains was canceled in 1992. Cameron has never expressed regret. That is, at a minimum, consistent. Number 8. Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher, Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Here is the premise. You take the most famous love story in comic book history, cast 2 attractive, charismatic leads, and build your entire show around the romantic tension between them. The catch? That premise only works for as long as the tension does. And the tension only works for as long as the 2 people generating it are willing and able to generate it together. Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, premiered on ABC in 1993, and for a season or 2, it delivered exactly what it promised. Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher were genuinely magnetic together. The banter between Clark Kent and Lois Lane had the kind of snap and warmth that makes you root for 2 characters even when you already know they are going to end up together. The show was a hit. Hatcher became one of the most recognizable faces on television. Then things got complicated. Reports from the set described a working relationship between the 2 leads that had cooled considerably from those early seasons. The specifics have been discussed with varying degrees of candor over the years, but the on-screen effect was visible to anyone paying attention. The chemistry that had powered the first 2 seasons became progressively harder to find in seasons 3 and 4. And here is the brutal irony. The moment the show finally put Lois and Clark together, got them engaged, got them married, was almost exactly the moment the magic stopped working. Because the magic had never actually been about the destination. It had been about 2 specific people generating heat in the same room, and whatever was happening between them off camera had made that impossible. ABC canceled the show in 1997 without bothering to film a proper finale. The last thing audiences saw was an unexplained alien baby left on the doorstep of a couple who had just gotten married. No explanation, no resolution. Just an alien baby, a cut to credits, and 4 seasons of investment receiving exactly 0 closure. If there is a more fitting metaphor for what happens when the off-screen relationship poisons the on-screen one, television history has not produced it yet. Number 7. George Peppard and the A-Team cast. Now, if you watched our video on characters who disappeared without explanation, you already heard the story of Amy Amanda Allen, the civilian journalist, played by Melinda Kulia, who was pushed out of the A-Team after George Peppard reportedly made clear that his vision for the show did not include sharing the spotlight with a woman. And if you thought that was the whole story, well, it was not even close to the whole story. The A-Team premiered on NBC in 1983 and was an immediate phenomenon. a group of wrongly convicted military operatives using their skills to help people while evading the military police. It was loud, it was fun, it was practically engineered in a laboratory to sell action figures. Peppard played Colonel John Hannibal Smith, the cigar-chomping tactical genius who loved it when a plan came together. And to be clear, Peppard was a legitimate Hollywood star who had earned his place at the front of the call sheet. The problem was that Peppard treated the A-Team less as an ensemble and more as a personal vehicle that happened to have 3 other people in it. His conflicts with Mr. T are the most documented. 2 strong personalities with very different ideas about hierarchy and respect, operating on a set where the power dynamics were perpetually contested. Dirk Benedict, who played Faceman Templeton Peck, has given interviews over the years that paint a picture of a set where navigating Peppard's moods was as significant a daily challenge as learning lines. By season 5, NBC had seen enough. They retooled the show dramatically, introducing a new commanding officer and restructuring the team in ways that satisfied exactly nobody. The show was canceled in 1987. Peppard passed away in 1994. Mr. T has spoken about the experience with a combination of fondness for the show and candor about the difficulties of making it, which is, if you think about it, a pretty elegant way to handle a complicated legacy. Number 6. Roseanne Barr and the Roseanne writing staff. Roseanne premiered on ABC in 1988 and was, without exaggeration, one of the most important sitcoms in the history of the medium. In an era of idealized television families, Roseanne Barr walked onto a screen and showed a working-class family that looked like actual working-class families. Tired, funny, struggling to pay bills, deeply loving in a way that did not require violins or a swelling musical score. It was raw and honest and immediately essential. The behind-the-scenes story of how that show was made, however, reads less like a television production and more like a decade-long emergency. Roseanne Barr's conflicts with the writing staff are legendary in the industry. Not legendary the way some things are legendary, meaning people say it with a smile. Legendary the way that means industry veterans mention it in the same breath as the weather and natural disasters. The estimates of how many writers and producers passed through that show over 9 seasons range from dozens to figures that challenge basic comprehension. Some lasted episodes, some lasted weeks. John Goodman, who played Dan Connor with enough warmth and skill to earn him the kind of career retrospective praise that tends to arrive late, has given public comments over the years that were measured and careful and communicated a very specific quiet exhaustion that speaks louder than any direct accusation. By the final season in 1996 and 1997, the show had drifted so far from what it had been that the original series would not have recognized it. The Connors won the lottery. Dan had a heart attack. The storylines had a surreal, untethered quality that felt less like creative choices and more like the output of a writer's room, operating under conditions that made coherent long-term planning impossible. Then the finale revealed that much of the later seasons had been a novel Roseanne was writing, a narrative device that was either a bold meta-statement or a retroactive explanation for why things had stopped making sense, depending on your generosity. The show was ultimately revived in 2018, then retooled as The Connors after Barr's widely reported offensive tweet led ABC to act swiftly. That story belongs to a different countdown. But the original run remains one of television's most complicated legacies, something genuinely great that somehow consumed everything around it on its way out the door. Number 5. Shannon Doherty and her co-stars. Beverly Hills, Storm, 902, 10 and Charmed. We have to take a moment here, before anything else, to acknowledge that Shannon Doherty passed away in July of 2024 after a years-long battle with breast cancer that she faced with a public honesty and genuine courage that reminded everyone why her talent had made her famous in the first place. This entry is about television history. It is not a verdict on a person. Hold that thought. Now, Shannon Doherty holds a distinction in television history that is, to our knowledge, completely unique. She is the only performer to be fired from 2 separate hit shows, on 2 separate networks, in 2 separate decades, in significant part because her co-stars found the working relationship untenable. That is not a rumor, that is a documented pattern. Beverly Hills 902. 10 premiered on Fox in 1990. Dougherty played Brenda Walsh, the Midwestern girl navigating the glamour and dysfunction of Beverly Hills, and she was genuinely compelling. The show found its audience and became a defining cultural artifact of the early 90s. But behind the scenes, her relationship with co-star Jenny Garth deteriorated into something that producers could no longer manage around. The details have been recounted in books, interviews, and retrospectives. By season 4, a decision was made. Brenda Walsh was written out. The show continued until 2006 more seasons without her. Then charmed on the WB, which we touched on in our Characters Who Ruined Shows video, where we discussed how Kaylee Cuoco's character, Billy, eventually displaced the Halliwell sisters from their own show. But that displacement happened in season 8. Dougherty had already been gone for 5 seasons by then. Her departure after season 3, driven by a reported conflict with co-star Alyssa Milano that had reached the point of irreconcilability, forced the writers to invent an entirely new Halliwell sister, Paige, as a narrative workaround. Rose McGowan filled the role admirably, but the fact that the show had to restructure its entire premise to remove one actress tells you everything about how that situation had developed. Dougherty's later work, including her role in the 90210 revival and her unflinching public documentation of her cancer treatment, deserves to stand on its own terms. She was complicated, she was talented, and she is missed. Number 4. Patricia Richardson and Tim Allen, Home Improvement.
It's the greatest gift you've ever given me.
I gave you 3 children.
Yeah, but
Home Improvement premiered on ABC in 1991 and proceeded to become one of the defining sitcoms of the entire decade. Tim Allen as Tim the Toolman Taylor, a testosterone-fueled home improvement show host who constantly broke everything and learned life lessons from his neighbor Wilson over the back fence. It was warm and funny, and consistently one of the highest-rated shows on television. And a significant portion of what made it work was Patricia Richardson as Jill Taylor, whose comic timing and genuine chemistry with Allen grounded every episode in something real. Richardson received 4 Emmy nominations for that role. 4. In a decade when television was not exactly suffering from a shortage of talented women, she was doing work that was genuinely exceptional, and she was being compensated at a level that did not reflect that. Her contract negotiations in the later seasons became increasingly contentious, driven in significant part by the pay disparity between herself and Allen, a disparity that Richardson was unwilling to accept as a permanent condition of her employment on a show she was actively making better every week. The relationship between the two leads cooled as the contract tensions escalated. Allen has spoken about Richardson's departure with what sounds like genuine regret. Richardson has been more direct about the circumstances that led to it. By season 9, she was gone, and the show ended in 1999 with a series finale that drew enormous numbers because audiences wanted closure even for a show that had quietly lost something in its final stretch. What Home Improvement required from both of them was the kind of ease and warmth that looks effortless on screen and is anything but. It requires 2 people who are, at minimum, willing to bring their best selves to the same room on the same day and find something genuine together. When the off-screen relationship between those 2 people has been corroded by years of unresolved professional grievances, manufacturing that ease becomes a daily act of theater. Eventually, the theater becomes too expensive for everyone involved. The finale numbers were great. The final seasons were not. Number 3, Brett Butler and Grace Under Fire.
Her whole side of the story, and I was like, you mean you were dating a married man and he said he loved you? And
Let us be honest up front about something. Most of the entries on this list have a certain amount of dark comedy built into them. Feuding stars, network panic, creative implosions. There is a version of almost every story on this countdown that is genuinely funny in retrospect. This one is less funny in retrospect. So, we are going to tell it straight. Grace Under Fire premiered on ABC in 1993. Brett Butler played Grace Kelly, a woman rebuilding her life after leaving an abusive marriage, raising 3 kids, and working at an oil refinery in a southern town. It was sharp and funny, and Butler's comedic instincts were genuinely special. The show was an immediate hit. Massive ratings, critical praise. Butler was on the cover of magazines and collecting award nominations, and looked like someone who had arrived exactly where her talent had always been pointing. Behind the scenes, Butler was struggling with substance abuse issues that escalated through the run of the show in ways that made the production increasingly unstable. The chaos that followed affected every corner of the series. Writers and producers departed in numbers that were not normal, even by the historically high turnover standards of network television. The role of her son Quentin was recast not once but twice, as actors found themselves unable to continue working under the conditions of the production. ABC canceled Grace Under Fire in 1998 after 5 seasons. Butler has been publicly and painfully honest about this period of her life in interviews over the years, and that honesty is worth something. It is worth more than the easy laugh this story might otherwise generate. She has spoken about her addiction and its consequences with a clarity and a lack of self-pity that is frankly harder to sustain than the kind of carefully managed public narrative that most people in her position would have chosen. Grace Under Fire was a genuinely good show that deserved a better ending than it got. So did the people who made it. Number 2, Sybil Shepherd and Christine Baranski. Sybil, stay with us, because the actress at the center of this entry is going to appear one more time before this countdown is finished. And when she does, it will make complete and total sense. Sybil premiered on CBS in 1995. Sybil Shepherd played Sybil Sheridan, a twice-divorced struggling actress navigating Hollywood and motherhood, and the specific indignities of being a woman of a certain age, in a business that had very firm ideas about what that meant. It was sharp and funny, and Shepherd was excellent in it. But the conversation about Sybil almost immediately stopped being about Sybil Sheridan and started being about Mary Ann Thorpe. Christine Baranski played Mary Ann, Sybil's best friend, a deliciously bitter, perfectly dressed divorcee whose ex-husband's recurring misfortunes provided the show's most reliable comedic engine. Baranski's performance was so precise, so brilliantly timed, and so effortlessly commanding that she won the Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series in 1996 and was widely and correctly identified as the best thing in the show. A show that was, to be clear, named after someone else. Reports from the production described Shepherd's reaction to being outshone in her own series as a significant source of on-set tension. The specific mechanisms varied, but the general trajectory pointed in one direction. Baranski's role was, by various accounts, subject to pressure that reflected the uncomfortable reality of what happens when a supporting performer threatens to become a show's actual center of gravity. CBS grew increasingly uncomfortable with what was happening behind the scenes and canceled the show in 1998 after 4 seasons. Here is the detail that belongs in a television history textbook. Sybil Shepherd reportedly found out her show had been canceled when she arrived at the studio one morning and discovered that her parking spot had been reassigned. CBS communicated the end of a 4-year run through the real estate implications of a painted rectangle on a parking lot. If you were writing this as fiction, your editor would tell you it was too on the nose. Christine Baranski has since become one of the most celebrated working actresses in television, with a career that includes The Good Wife, The Good Fight, and a catalog of supporting work that reminds audiences regularly of exactly what they saw in Mary Ann Thorpe. Sometimes the universe really does have a sense of humor. Number 1. Bruce Willis and Sybil Shepherd. Moonlighting.
Jer?
I like how you warble.
Thank you.
Some duet, huh?
Yeah.
And there she is again, of course. There is a reason this is number 1. There is a reason that when television writers and producers sit in rooms and talk about the most spectacular self-inflicted wound in the history of the medium, this is the show that comes up first. Moonlighting is not just a cautionary tale. It is the cautionary tale, the original, the one every other entry on this list is measured against. Moonlighting premiered on ABC in 1985 and was, in those first 2 seasons, something that television almost never produces. Genuinely electric, Sybil Shepherd played Maddie Hayes, a former model who inherits a failing detective agency. Bruce Willis, in a role that nobody expected to make him famous, played David Addison, the fast-talking, smart-mouthed investigator who ran it. The two of them together generated a kind of chemistry that critics ran out of metaphors trying to describe. The banter was extraordinary, the tension was real, the show was witty and strange and self-aware in ways that network television of that era almost never allowed itself to be. It broke the fourth wall. It did a black and white film noir episode. It staged a musical sequence. It was operating on a completely different frequency from everything else on the dial. The show made Sybil Shepherd a television star at a moment when her film career had stalled. And it made Bruce Willis, who had been a struggling actor with a handful of minor credits, into a genuine phenomenon so quickly that it still feels implausible in retrospect. ABC had lightning in a bottle. They had two people creating something that nobody had planned and nobody could fully explain, and that audiences were watching in enormous numbers. Then came 1988. Then came Die Hard. Die Hard turned Bruce Willis from a television star into a movie star overnight, and the effect on Moonlighting was seismic. His film commitments began to encroach on his television schedule in ways that the production could not absorb. Episodes were delayed. Filming was restructured. The writers found themselves constructing storylines around two lead characters who were increasingly difficult to place in the same room, because one of the people playing those characters was not always available to be in the same room. And the off-screen relationship between Willis and Shepherd, which had been by all accounts warm and collaborative in the early years, had curdled into something openly hostile. The specific grievances have been described differently depending on who you ask. Shepherd has been candid about her perspective in her interviews over the years. Willis has been characteristically more guarded. What is not disputed is that by seasons 3 and 4, the set had become an environment where the tension between the two leads was a daily operational challenge that the entire production had to navigate around. Here is the cruelest irony. The show's defining dramatic question, the will they or won't they between Maddie and David, was resolved in a season 3 episode that drew the second highest ratings in the show's entire run. Audiences had invested 3 seasons in this question. The answer delivered everything they had been waiting for, and almost immediately the show began to come apart. Because the romantic tension that had made 5 seasons worth watching was not just a writing construct. It was being generated by 2 specific people who had a specific dynamic off-screen that the camera was somehow capturing and amplifying. When that dynamic turned hostile, the romance on screen lost its engine. Writers cannot write around genuine contempt. Audiences can feel the difference between 2 people who are pretending and 2 people who are not. Moonlighting was canceled by ABC in 1989 after 5 seasons. The final season produced 14 episodes, many of them delayed, restructured, or built around the absence of one lead or the other. Willis went on to one of the most successful action film careers in Hollywood history. Shepherd rebuilt her television career, including with the Sybil entry you have already heard about at number 2 on this very countdown. They have given interviews about Moonlighting over the decades that range from gracious to pointed depending on the interviewer and the year. What Moonlighting was in those first 2 seasons was genuinely irreplaceable. Not because the writing was better than anything else on television, though it often was. Not because the production was more ambitious, though it sometimes was, but because 2 specific people found something together on that screen that neither of them entirely planned, and that neither of them was ultimately willing or able to protect. That is what makes it number 1, and it is not close. And that is 11 TV co-stars whose off-screen relationships burn the whole thing down. And here is the thing that runs through every single entry on this list. Not one of these shows was ended by bad writing alone. Not by ratings alone, not by network indifference, not by changing tastes. In every case, the ingredient that was missing was 2 specific people who had briefly made something real together, and then, for whatever reason, decided they were done making it. The writing staff cannot replace that. The network cannot recast it. And no amount of new characters, restructured storylines, or desperately optimistic retooling can manufacture the thing that the original 2 people had stopped being willing to give.